So Bernard, we've just seen Ulster's Heineken Champions Cup dreams pretty brutally ended for this season. It was all one-way traffic for Toulouse really after they got that early try for Cheslin Colby, and Ulster's injury problems. Billy Byrne's gone off injured early in the game as well, having that 6-2 split on the bench. They were chasing it really just from then on, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a horrible afternoon for Ulster. They would have been, I suppose, big underdogs going out there, but they'll be very disappointed with how the game went. I mean, that first half, even though Colby was brilliant, Tomas Ramos missed a few uncharacteristic easy kicks. The game was very much still in the balance. They hadn't folded in that first 20 minutes. They'd stayed competitive, but realistically, they're going to look back in that game and see it as a game where they didn't really put their best foot forward in any manner or means, and it's an end to a disappointing season to them, despite the fact that they qualified, which is obviously an achievement in itself. Plus, they're in a final. I think the last 5 or 6 weeks will be hard to swallow for them.
So yeah, you think that even, like we would say, probably up until COVID hit and the lockdown arrived, Ulster very much were on the upward trajectory. Would you say now the course of the last 5-6 weeks, it's 4 defeats from 5 games. Granted, they got to the Pro 14 final, but that place was probably secured before they stepped out onto the pitch against Connacht in that opening game. Will it sting? Will this sting carry maybe on into next season, or are they going to be able to park it?
Look, it's going to be difficult. Usually, when you have not get knocked out and it's the end of the season, you have 3 months to, get away on a beach, recover mentally, come back and start to rebuild your game or add to it. They effectively will have maybe a week off and then into Pro 14. So I think the best thing they can do is hope to get some wins quickly, build a bit of confidence, and start to fine-tune their game and get guys back from injury. I mean, Coetzee is huge for them, like Balacloon, Luke Marshall, etc. So there is some guys to come in who are out because of injury, but the squad look lethargic. They look like they're not fit at the moment physically. Now, whether that's from the lack of self-belief from losses, but they're a pale imitation of what we saw back in January, February. And listen, they've got very good coaches. I think Dwayne Peel, Jared Payne, Roddy Grant, Dan McFarland are excellent coaches, and it's up to them now to rebuild their confidence over the next probably 5-6 weeks.
You mentioned confidence there. One person who looked pretty bereft of it this afternoon was Jacob Stockdale, pretty much right from the start. I know you mentioned during commentary you probably wouldn't put too much blame on him for the tries. Cheslin Colby is just that good at stepping inside you, and as you were saying, maybe you have to show him inside rather than show him outside. But there were other areas. There were loose kicks. There was, simple, poor handling mistakes as well. He looks like a player who just is struggling with confidence still, and we're talking almost a year on from the World Cup now.
Yeah, and he hasn't got it back, and I know Ulster have given him some games at full back, trying to get him involved in the game more. The thing that I suppose is most worrying for me about Jacob Stockdale, not knowing him as an individual, is how when he has a bad moment, it seems to magnify and multiply. And obviously, he got stepped twice for 2 tries, but it was the other parts of his game which don't require talent or aren't around defence that he didn't really, impose himself. And I just take an example from today's game. Johan Uge, a quality international rugby player, but now he's probably been usurped in terms of the Dupoints and Intermacs and the Cobys in terms of his attacking player. But yet, every impact he made defensively was at 100% intensity. Whereas, Jacob didn't really get involved at all in that. Didn't go looking for work. James Hume made some errors, but at least he's standing up to be counted and trying to partake in the game. And that's the scary thing. And again, he's a guy with unbelievable talent. But it's going to be really interesting whether he features for Ireland in this autumn, because on form you couldn't pick him, and it'd be a really big call from Andy Farrell to put him in there to start in the remainder of the Six Nations.
If he was to be dropped, can you see him being the type of player to use that in a positive sense, to give himself the kick up the backside, or would you fear that if he's actually dropped, it might just kind of exacerbate a poor run of form?
Yeah, but that's the problem is I think he's got given game time since his form dropped on the basis that, dropping him isn't necessarily the issue, and maybe he won't react well from that. But there's a stage where you have to just, make that call and for the sake of the competition in the squad and giving other people an opportunity. So I think there is, there's candidates out there. James Lowe's qualified for Ireland now. Conway's on form. Keith Earls. You could potentially play a different fullback and play Larmer on the wing. So there is competition out there. I just don't see, unless he has a stormer to the start of the new Pro 14, how he can feature for Ireland until he picks up his form.
Where's John Cooney at the moment in an Ireland depth chart? Because pre-COVID, again, I know we're talking so much about pre-COVID, but it's just the way this season has gone. Before COVID, it looked like he was actually going to be getting in for a start against Italy in the Six Nations. He was finally going to get his run in the 9 shirt for Ireland, but he hasn't looked particularly good since the restart of games with that opening game against Connacht. He was dropped for Albie Mathieson last week. Granted, he was brought back into the starting team this week, but had to play out of position at times just because the fractured nature of that second half. It's probably hard to get a true read on where his game was today. If you were judging it probably before this week, where would you have him in that depth chart?
Look, I think the problem at the moment, and it's probably good for Cooney, is none of our 9s are on form. Murray hasn't come back to the form we want. Expect Luke McGrath struggled a little bit yesterday and has struggled so far this season. Cooney's playing behind. The only thing in Cooney's favour is he's playing behind a pack that are struggling, and I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt of that. I think he is a big game player, and I think that again he's someone who just needs to find his rhythm, get some game time over the course of October, and if he has a strong October in the first round or two, I think he can become number 1 for Ireland, because I think Farrell is going to have to look at the Murray form as well, and again he's a player that he keeps getting picked but hasn't really hit the heights that we know is capable of. So worrying from an Ireland point of view of some of our key positions not having guys in form, and we know Johnny's number 1 for Ireland at 10, but with Joey out injured, there's not an obvious replacement. Maybe the obvious replacement is his backup in Leinster, which is Ross Byrne, which again isn't great because he doesn't get a huge amount of game time.
And speaking of Leinster, obviously that was the story of the weekend. Pretty much Leinster losing against Saracens yesterday. Granted, a strong second half comeback, but once they almost got back into within a score of Saracens, just the experience of that Saracens team, they were just able to squeeze them out and play the closing 5 or 6 minutes in the Leinster half. Overall, what went wrong?
Oh, look, you can't give away 7 penalties at scrum time against a team who are as strong defensively as Saracens, who have a good goal kicker. They struggled under the high ball. Wigglesworth had a stormer. They struggled at the breakdown. Just Saracens' physicality just took them into places that they're not used to going, and they looked totally out of sync. And they did what they've done to opposition over the last 5 weeks or 4 weeks. Is what happened to them, whereas they get a lead and then they just put a squeeze on you and make you play out of areas you don't want to play out of. Saracens managed to get that lead with the win in the first half and score that brilliant try, obviously from a set piece, and Leinster then had to chase the game, and they looked ill-equipped to do it, and I think they'll be unbelievably disappointed. There's no embarrassment losing to the Saracens team. When you saw it on paper, you knew it was a quality side, and they've got a phenomenal culture to be able to come and stay together given everything that's happened to them. But Leinster, I think it's 1-7 now, 1 European Cup in 7 years. They expect more from themselves, and while they are the dominant team in the Pro 14, they'd be very disappointed with not putting more European trophies on the mantelpiece to warrant the quality they have.
Obviously, pretty much everyone in the media and the outside and pundits and analysts before the game were expecting Leinster to come through and win. Do you think any of that kind of confidence or overconfidence maybe seep through to the players themselves? Do you think that maybe they weren't expecting what they were actually getting from Saracens?
No, I think if you looked at Saracens' games in the Premiership this year, they were rotating their squad a lot, but you could see the unity they had, the energy they had, the game plan they had. The problem is, even if you're up for it and know it's a big threat, dealing with the power of Billy Vunipola, Maka Vunipola, Itoje, Brad Barrett, it's a different matter. You can't. It's not just mental. It's physical, and that's why they earn big money. That's why they're World Cup finalists, and will go on to do. Have done great things in the game, and will continue to. What Leinster struggled with is dealing with that power. Same thing in Newcastle a year ago. We felt, and they felt, that they had learned from that. But until you can find a way to play around that power or to avoid it, if you don't have it, you can't win.
And you mentioned when we were chatting on air on the radio earlier, like it was through that spine of the scrum where things actually really went wrong. It was, with Sean Cronin, Devin Toner in at the second row as well. Can you put your finger on why Sean Cronin, for example, was picked ahead of Ronan Keller? Was it a line-out issue stemming from last week's game? There were a couple of errant throws.
I don't think you'd bring Sean Cronin in to fix the line-out. I think it's maybe rotation, and they have rotated. So Cronin wasn't on the bench in the final. I think it was James Treacy, and maybe he was told 2 weeks ago, you're going to get your shot against Saracens, and maybe they felt they wanted to play high tempo. His running game would be, key. The problem was, and it's hindsight's 2020 vision. Obviously, it backfired. He's definitely not the best scrummaging hooker in that squad, and they probably felt with Porter and Healy being so powerful and established, they could maybe carry that. And then the problem is, you get exposed early doors. It gives Saracens energy. It gives them points on the board. It's very difficult to problem solve during the game. And that Saracens front row of Mako, Jamie George, and Vincent Koch is phenomenal. It could play any team in the world and put them under pressure. But I think in hindsight, going for Cronin and Dev is something they look at. It mightn't have been the key reason, but maybe Baird or Fardy in the second row with Kelleher probably in the starting hooker might have been the best option. But again, hindsight's 2020 vision.
And as we said as well, sometimes when you get off to a poor start in the scrums and concede a couple of penalties, sometimes you can turn it around. It's very, very difficult to turn it around when you have a French ref and that picture is painted from the start.
Look, I know this from France. If you can, in a top 14 game at home, if you can win a few penalties early doors, you're going to have an easy ride at scrum time. And even I thought at the end, Leinster, managed to deal with that, but Saracens were very cute around how they wheeled it. And again, once he has that image of being dominant, they're going to get the penalties. And that was the problem for Leinster, was because they gave away penalties. I think Leinster would have wanted to play a high tempo game. They would have wanted to test Saracens' fitness in the last 20 minutes. And in fairness, I thought Saracens were starting to fade. But because Saracens could get that penalty at key moments, they were able to slow it down, take their time kicking the ball to touch, walk to the line out, and they were managing to manage the energy battle a little bit better. So it was a real Achilles heel for Leinster, and it's obviously something Robin McBride and Leo Cullen will be scrutinising over the next probably week or two to try and find out what went wrong and to have a solution for it.
And I think the unfortunate thing for Leinster is they're probably going to have to wait a couple more years to get a shot at Saracens again in a Champions Cup, because they're relegated next season. Even if they get promoted, they'd be playing Challenge Cup rugby the following season, unless there's a dramatic change to the tournament. But that's two in a row now that Saracens have got over Leinster, and another incredibly masterminded victory for Mark McCall. Does a guy like Mark McCall actually get the credit he deserves this side of the water?
Probably not, and probably a little bit like Leo as well. Maybe doesn't get the credit because he's not a hands-on coach. But I think what McCall has built and managed to keep together, and that's the most important thing. I think, look at when teams are winning and there's that feel-good factor and there's support there that there was from the board, it's easier to keep a team happy. I think what he managed to do post the relegation, post the salary cap issue, and prepare a team to come to the Viva Stadium yesterday, a team that's broken up already, but with more people to depart at the end of this European Cup, which could have been yesterday, is phenomenal. And I think they played for each other. And I think McCall, given all the animosity and outside hatred and issues internally, obviously with some players seeing what other people were earning, etc., I think in terms of man management, he is he's an icon, an iconic figure in rugby, because not many managers will be able to do that. So he definitely doesn't get the credit he deserves. I think if they win the European Cup, it'll be 8 trophies. That group have won, which is phenomenal.
And finally then, yesterday's game, it played out as we've seen a huge amount of games between both Irish club sides and the Irish national team against England over the last few years, where it has been a lack of power that has cost them. We saw it with Munster earlier on this season, with Saracens in the Champions Cup last season in the final for Leinster, and we've seen it on numerous occasions over the course of the last 18 months with Ireland against England in both the Six Nations and World Cup warm-up matches as well. Is it getting towards a worrying trend, this lack of power when we're coming up against English teams?
Yeah, it is. It's the top end English teams, and I think the top end French teams. And unfortunately, we don't, because Leinster lost and Ulster have lost, we don't get to see how they compare to the likes of Exeter, or how Leinster compared to Racing Metro, because they got knocked out. But England have shown us in the last 4 games against England has been a massive deficiency on our part. We're obviously very technically well coached. We've got good game plans. We play for each other. But at the moment, the way the laws are, and they haven't changed with the new breakdown laws, bigger is better. And the 2 teams who got to the World Cup final, England and South Africa, didn't play the most attractive rugby, but they were built on power, size, and physicality, allied with a smart kicking game. I think Leinster have a smart kicking game. Ireland, probably a bit of work to do on that, but they'll get there. It's the power issue, and great. We're lucky Ryan Baird, Caelan Doris, etc. They have power. Maybe not to the level of Billy Bunapola or Itoje yet, but unfortunately or fortunately, they're the type of profiles that win you trophies at the top level. And while there has been for a long time, I suppose, a trend towards trying to find them in Irish rugby, maybe because of our population or our genetics, we don't produce as many as others. But we need to try and find them and bring them through our system.
We'll wait and see, Bernard. Thanks a million for joining us this afternoon, and enjoy the short off season.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.